Okay, so our topic today is going to be communism in East Asia, focusing mostly on China. So, communist China is still the largest communist power in the world today. It's one of the few communist nations left, and it's going to have a major impact on US history, as you'll see when you get to it next year. So today we're going to look at how Mao eventually turned China into a communist state. He's going to create a totalitarian cult of personality, kind of like Stalin did. We're going to talk about China's role in the Cold War and how it influenced the course of U.S. and Soviet relations, even. So here's your vocab. Not going to spend too much time on this. The two you should probably focus on the most are going to be the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, but later on this presentation, they're both going to have slides dedicated to them. So a little bit of background, you do not need to write this down if you don't need it. We've gone over this in previous units, but remember China had been under the Qing dynasty. That was the old imperial family that had ruled China for about 400 years, but they're going to be overthrown in the 1900s, very early 1900s, by the Chinese Republic. And they set up a nationalist democracy. But this democracy has a lot of issues. It struggles with its economy, it's corrupt, and it's fighting wars with warlords and communists all over the place. The Chinese Civil War is going on for about 20 years, you could say, during nationalist China. But the big issue comes with the invasion of Imperial Japan in 1931. So 1931, Imperial Japan invades. They take a lot of Chinese territory, and this causes the communists and the nationalists to actually have to unite to fight the Japanese. But the minute the war is over, the Civil War restarts between the nationalists and the communists. So you probably could have guessed the Chinese communists eventually win the Civil War. And they win because they got the support of the people. So the guy up in the left-hand corner, that's Mao. Mao gets the support of the peasants. What he does is he tells his soldiers, if you read about the Long March, while they're retreating from southern China into northern China, they need to support the peasants. They need to pay for any food that they get. They need to pay for if they sleep somewhere. They need to not go into villages and steal stuff and terrorize the people because then the people will support them. He promises to redistribute the land to the peasants. A lot of land in China was owned by very, very few families. So by saying, hey, I'm going to get the peasants' land, the peasants begin to support the Chinese communists. He promises equality to women, and most importantly, he uses guerrilla tactics to defeat the nationalists. He never actually faces the nationalists in battle. He has his men, blow up supply lines, assassinate officers, kill a few soldiers here and there, and wear the nationalists down over time. And eventually, that'll lead the communists to victory in the Civil War. So once the communists have won, they immediately begin to transform China. All businesses are completely nationalized in China. If you don't remember what nationalizing is, let's say that you own an oil company. The government comes in and you no longer own it. They take it and it is owned by the state. The state is the government. So all businesses are now owned by the government. And he immediately begins to build up industry. He wants to make more steel. He wants to make more oil. He wants China to become a modern industrial economy like the Soviet Union or the United States. And he gets a lot of his support from the Soviet Union. China is a major communist power. The Soviet Union is kind of the leader of the communist world. So the Soviet Union began shipping agricultural products, machinery, weapons to China to support them. Farms are going to be collectivized. If you owned your farm, you no longer do. It's going to be worked by the whole town. Everybody works together. Schools, healthcare is increased, and like he promised, women do get more equality with men. So the Chinese communists turned China into what's called a one-party state. That means that the only party that is technically allowed is the Communist Party of China. You have to vote, you have to be loyal to the Communist Party. Religion is persecuted. If you look down in the bottom left, those are Buddhist statues, and they're going to try and root out and destroy religion. Because if you're loyal to religion, you're not loyal to the Communist Party. So the picture in the bottom right is going to show what Mao makes in China the best. He creates that cult of personality, all the people carrying his pictures. He's almost worshipped as a god because he is the leader of communist China. He's the one who's doing all this. So the Great Leap Forward is going to be Mao's personal plan to try and shock China into being a modern industrial country. So China was very agrarian. Most of the people farmed for a living. They didn't have a lot of industry. And Mao says that to be a powerful country, they have to have industry. So his goal is increase all production in the country, everything from rice to tanks. So what he has the peasants do is create what's called backyard furnaces, and this is where the peasants will make steel in their backyard. And this is a terrible idea because peasants who have done nothing but farm their whole lives and cannot read are probably not going to make good steel. And they're not going to be able to focus on farming. So what happens is the Great Leap Forward ends up being a massive failure. Those backyard furnaces create useless goods. The steel can't be used for anything. And then because the peasants could not grow food because they were trying to make steel, there's a famine that kills 55 million people between 1959 and 1961. The communists try and frame the Great Leap Forward, though, as something that's going to push China into the modern world. They're going to push forward on industry, okay? So if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see those backyard furnaces. Not the best way to make steel. It makes it look like the country is doing really well, but actually it's making useless goods and it's not producing anything that it can really use. You can see the effects of the famine here. China was just racked with famine after famine during these years because the peasants were constantly working on other things other than growing grain, growing rice. This picture, though, shows Mao's goal. He wanted the whole country to work to modernize China. Even children went out and they're putting down bricks to pave roads. They're going to try and, through hard work, shock China into being that industrialized nation. So, alongside the Great Leap Forward is going to be the Cultural Revolution. And this is not going to focus on industry. This is going to focus on how people think. So Mao's goal is to purge China, get rid of the bourgeoisie and the non-revolutionaries. That basically means anybody they don't consider thoroughly communist. So Mao puts out this thing called the Little Red Book, and it's his book of what he thinks communism should be. It's his sayings, his ideals, and they put it out in the schools, and it's picked up by students all the way from high school, college, down to elementary. And they begin forming these things called Red Guards, which is in the bottom left-hand corner. And they're groups of students who are very like fanatical communists. And they begin to go around attacking and killing anybody they see as bourgeoisie. Teachers, college professors, skilled workers, factory owners, factory foremen, people who are skilled at writing, painting, anything like that, because they are not enough like of a communist. But what this does is it ends up crashing the economy because they get rid of all the people who can actually make steel, who can run the economy, who can paint, who can write books, the teachers, the professors. So it really backfires, and eventually Mao has to actually send in the army to put down and actually kill some of the Red Guards that he created. So overall, you can see that Mao's ideas in the early days of communism has a huge human toll. Millions dead. We're talking upwards, some people say, of 70 million people die within the first 20 years of communism in China. So now we're going to switch to China's relations with the rest of the world. So Chinese and the Soviets were originally very close. They're the two leading communist powers. The Soviets kind of see themselves as like the fathers of communism. They're the leaders of the communist world. But the Chinese see themselves as carrying on Stalin's legacy of communism. So the relations are very uneasy. They share a long border and they disagree with each other about who is more communist. So what happens is in 1959, something called the Sino-Soviet split happens, and this is the end of the Chinese-Soviet alliance. Whenever you see Sino on a side note, all that means is Chinese. So their alliance is going to split. They're going to say that the Soviet Union is going to say that the Chinese aren't communist enough. The Chinese are going to say the Soviet Union isn't communist enough. And a country across the ocean is going to see this, and they're going to use it, and they're going to try and exploit it to weaken the Soviet Union. And that country is the United States of America. So originally, the United States and China and the People's Republic of China, which is communist China, did not have a good relationship. The U.S. doesn't even recognize the People's Republic of China. We say you're not even a real country. We still recognize the nationalists who fled to Taiwan, which we will go over in the next couple slides. We actually fight each other during the Korean War. If you look at that picture in the top right, it's a US soldier capturing a Chinese soldier during the Korean War. So we don't have a good relationship. But when the Sino Soviet split happens, the United States sees a way to kind of drive a wedge in between the two major communist powers. The United States begins approaching China. President Nixon visits China and he starts diplomatic relations with China. He makes trade treaties. There's some military stuff that goes on to try and isolate the Soviet Union from all its communist allies. So this is where we're going to talk about the other piece of China, which is the nationalists. So when the nationalists are beaten in mainland China, they flee to the island of Taiwan right off the coast here where my mouse is. And Taiwan is set up as a democracy. The issue is China views it as just a breakaway province. This is like if the state of Texas broke away and said, we're not going to be part of the United States anymore. Taiwan, though, says that it actually owns all of China and it's the actual government. So there's a lot of tension there between the two countries. Taiwan is not officially recognized as a real country by a lot of different places, though. So it's kind of like in limbo. It does become a major power, though. It's an economic powerhouse. It is very, very capitalist, and China does not want that right off their coast. So it's going to be a major, major issue. So that's our notes for today, talking about China and the communist revolution that took place in it. If you have any questions, as always, you can let me know.